Britain, 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 land of the tea-drinking, football-loving nation. But what about those Brits who want to move to the wonderful Tim's-drinking, maple syrup-loving nation of Canada? Now, of course I'm kidding with those stereotypes, but there are a lot of reasons why Brits would want to move to Canada. So in this video, we're going to take a look at what some of those reasons could be. So grab a Tim's and join me on this journey. So number one is adventure. And let me tell you, there are so many things you can do in Canada if you're a pretty adventurous person, like I think myself. So for example, in Canada, you can do things like hiking up mountains, which is just incredible. You can go skiing in the winter, which if you're good at skiing, that's great. If you're not like me, you got a lot of learning to do. But there's just so many wonderful things you can do. Other things like being in Saskatchewan, wherever I'm from, going to lakes and just really enjoying the nature around you. Don't get me wrong, we do have nature in the UK, but it's just pretty incredible in Canada. And to be honest, when I lived in the UK, I barely actually went into any kind of nature, which here I just seem to do all the time. So number two is affordability. Both Canada and the UK are actually quite expensive places to live, especially if you're living in the biggest cities in Canada, like Toronto or Vancouver, or if you're in the UK, in somewhere like London. They're pretty expensive wherever you go. With that said, in my experience, my cost of living has been way less in Canada. Now, I'm not in a big city, I'm actually in a smaller city within Saskatchewan, which of course does make a difference. With that said, in the UK, we are experiencing a cost of living crisis right now, and because of Brexit and other factors, things are just getting really expensive. And this is something where, although it's expensive in Canada, I don't think we have hit that level of extremes like we're seeing in the UK just yet. Thinking about the cost of living crisis, it makes sense why so many Brits are seeking opportunities abroad, and Canada is definitely one of those countries where lots of Brits are moving to. So number three is that we share a language. Well, kind of. Most of Canada speak English, apart from the province of Quebec where they majority speak French. You do have some provinces like New Brunswick where you can speak both English and French. However, English is spoken across the majority of the country, again excluding Quebec. One thing I will say though is in terms of language, you have got other Indigenous languages within Canada as well, which are as equally as important to mention as well, even if they're not official Canadian languages. But the fact that most people speak English really helps. And although Canadian English and British English is very different, at the same time it is similar, and you know that you'll be understood moving to Canada, or at least in most places. Number four is safety. And both Canada and the UK are relatively safe countries. However, in my personal experience, Canada seems to be a much safer country compared to the UK. Now, I guess for me it's a little bit different because in the UK, I lived in London and in the southeast of England, whereas in Canada, I've mostly lived in Saskatchewan, and even the area I live in Saskatchewan has high crime rate, but I still feel safer here than what I did living in some parts of London. And I guess that's because the UK just has more people, which means that there's just more likely to have crime. In the place I live now, it may have a higher crime per capita, however, at the same time, the population is much lower. So in terms of actual crime and safety, I still feel safer here, even though on paper, it looks like there's higher crime. And I will also mention Canada is actually one of the safest countries in the world to live in. And that is something which is pretty incredible, and even for me, I feel safe most of the time. One thing I would say though is check the area where you're living in, because like most places, there's going to be areas that are easier to live in or safer to live in, and there's going to be other places that might not be as safe. So when you're moving to Canada, just make sure you do your research in terms of where you want to live and the areas you want to live in as well. So this leads me on to number five, which is the quality of life. Quality of life is something that is really important when you consider moving abroad, and don't get me wrong, both Canada and the UK have a pretty decent quality of life. With that said, I'm pretty sure most Brits who have moved to Canada will probably agree that Canada actually has a slightly better quality of life compared to living in the UK. Canada is consistently rated really high in terms of quality of life, and thinking about my general well-being, I will have to say my well-being is a lot better living in Canada than what it was in the UK. And in my experience, and again, this probably goes more to living in Saskatchewan, but my quality of life is just a lot better and things just seem a lot more relaxed here and just a slower pace of life. Now, number 6, Canada is extremely welcoming to newcomers. This is something which I really found when moving to Canada, and I actually moved here as a permanent resident because my partner is from Canada and she moved back from England. However, even when I moved there, I still felt like there was support, not just from my partner and her family, of course, but also from the Canadian government too. And even when I applied for my permanent residency, I had things like access to pre-arrival services, and I actually found them really useful and really beneficial as well. And what that kind of is, it helped me just think about getting my credentials recognized, what I need to do when I get here. So things like getting my social insurance number and all those little things that I wouldn't have thought about unless I had access to those services. And even when I moved here, even though I'm in a fairly small city in Saskatchewan, I have to say even the support from new immigrants is pretty incredible. And that makes me really happy because that is a place that I want to be in. And even in the area that I'm living in, there's actually lots of newcomers, which is such a strength to the community that we are living in. And finally, number 7 is the space. Canada just has so much space compared to the UK. And I guess a lot of people living in London, like myself, would often call it a concrete jungle because there are just so many people crammed in such a short or a small space. And in Canada, it's the complete opposite. Again, a little bit different in those bigger cities, but given how big Canada is, you really do have a lot of space to breathe. And even if you're in those bigger cities, you still have the ability to go to mountains depending on where you are, or go out of that city environment and still be immersed by nature and the wonderful things that Canada has to offer. So there are just 7 very quick reasons why Brits moved to Canada. Now, these are just some of the reasons and there are so many more. So if you have any more reasons and if you're from the UK, I would love to hear from you in the comments down below. Or if you're a Canadian and you've lived in the UK, I would love to hear your experience too. So if you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you give the video a thumbs up. It really does help the channel out. And if you enjoyed the video and you want to see more of my content about my life in Canada and also living in Saskatchewan, then feel free to hit that subscribe button. And if there's anything you want to see, let me know in the comments down below. I'm excited it's summer, so hopefully I'll have a bit more time than what I have during the year to make more videos. So my name is Jack. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll catch you all soon. Bye for now.